Part 1. Dr. Sarah floated in the observation deck of the research vessel Prometheus, watching the stars through the reinforced viewport. She had been stationed at the edge of human space for 3 years now, studying spatial anomalies and weird physics that made most people's heads hurt. Tonight, her coffee had gone cold in its magnetic cup, forgotten. The readings on her tablet were impossible. "Sarah, are you seeing this?" Lieutenant's voice cracked over the intercom. He was young, fresh from the academy, and he sounded terrified. "I'm seeing it," Sarah said, her voice calm despite her racing heart. "Get everyone to their stations. Activate all sensor arrays, and send a message to Earth. Tell them we have a Category 5 dimensional breach." The space in front of the Prometheus was tearing. That was the only way to describe it. Reality itself seemed to split open like wet paper, and through the gap, something moved. Sarah had studied theoretical physics for 20 years. She had written papers on dimensional theory. None of it prepared her for the sight of something that existed in more dimensions than human eyes could process. The creature emerged slowly, and Sarah's mind struggled to understand what she was seeing. It was massive, easily the size of a small moon. Its body seemed to shift and change, appearing solid one moment and transparent the next. Tendrils of dark energy whipped around it, leaving trails that made the surrounding space shimmer and distort. Where it moved, stars behind it bent and twisted, their light pulled into impossible spirals. "The ship is leaving," reported. "They just jumped to FTL without warning. The observer vessel is doing the same." Sarah wasn't surprised. She had read the reports. The Galactic Council called these things. Every spacefaring species in the galaxy feared them. They appeared without warning, destroyed everything in their path, and vanished back into whatever hell dimension they came from. Entire civilizations had fallen to them. Some species had religious taboos against even speaking about them. "Let them go," Sarah said. She tapped commands into her tablet, pulling up protocols that the Prometheus crew had drilled 100 times but never used for real. "Activate containment net alpha. Deploy graviton anchors. I want dimensional stabilizers online in 30 seconds. "Doctor said carefully, "Those protocols are for specimen collection." "I know what they're for, Lieutenant." The Prometheus came alive. Unlike the warships of other species, the human research vessel wasn't designed for combat. Its weapons were sensor arrays, tractor beams, and containment fields strong enough to hold a collapsing star. Equipment that other species used to study asteroids and comets, humanity had simply scaled up. The noticed them now. It turned or seemed to turn, and Sarah felt pressure building in her skull. The thing was looking at them. She gripped her tablet and watched the readings flood in. Temperature fluctuations, radiation spikes, dimensional frequencies that shouldn't exist. "It's charging up," warned. "Energy readings are off the scale. Deploy the net now." The Prometheus fired, but instead of missiles or lasers, it launched a web of exotic matter, woven with quantum-entangled particles and dimensional anchors. The net spread wide, shimmering like oil on water, and wrapped around the creature thrashed, its tendrils whipping through space, and the Prometheus shuddered from the impact of distorted gravity waves. "It's trying to phase out," someone shouted from the engineering deck. "The dimensional stabilizers aren't holding." Sarah's fingers flew across her tablet. "Increase power to the graviton anchors. Flood the containment field with tachyon particles. If it wants to slip between dimensions, we'll make those dimensions very uncomfortable." The shrieked, though not with sound. Sarah felt it in her bones, in her teeth, a vibration that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The creature pulled against the net, trying to tear back into the rift it had come from. But the Prometheus held firm, its engines burning hot as it reeled in the catch. "Fire the sedative," Sarah ordered. "We don't know if it will even work," said. "We designed that for carbon-based life." "It has a nervous system. I can see it on the scans. Fire the sedative." The Prometheus launched a cloud of specially designed particles, each one programmed to disrupt neural activity. The cloud enveloped and for a long moment nothing happened. Then the creature's movements began to slow. Its thrashing became sluggish. The dark energy around it flickered and dimmed. "It's working," said, his voice filled with disbelief. "Holy hell, it's actually working." 2 hours later, the hung motionless in a containment field, wrapped in sensor nets and dimensional anchors. The Prometheus began the slow journey to Facility 7, humanity's xenobiology research station, towing its prize behind it. Sarah stood in the observation deck again, watching the creature. Up close, it was almost beautiful in its strangeness. She could see patterns in its surface now, mathematical structures that repeated and evolved. Her mind was already racing with questions. How did it move between dimensions? What did it eat? Did it think? Could it communicate? The comm system chimed. Sarah accepted the call and wasn't surprised to see Ambassador Maria Torres on the screen. Behind Torres, she could see the anxious faces of the Galactic Council representatives. "Doctor," Torres said pleasantly, "the Council has some concerns about your recent activity." An alien face pushed into view, its translation collar crackling. "Concerns? Your species has captured these creatures have destroyed star systems. They are death incarnate. You must release it immediately, far from any inhabited space." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "We've contained the entity safely. It poses no threat in its current state. We're transporting it to Facility 7 for study." The council chamber erupted in a dozen different languages. Torres waited for the noise to die down before speaking. "Doctor has followed all proper protocols. The entity is sedated, contained, and being transported under maximum security conditions." "You don't understand," another alien pleaded. "These things cannot be contained. They cannot be studied. They are chaos itself. Every species that has tried to fight them has failed." "We're not fighting it," Sarah said calmly. "We're researching it." "That's worse," the alien shrieked. "You'll anger it, you'll draw more of them." Sarah pulled up a holographic display showing the sensor data from the capture. "Look at this. The entity has a complex nervous system. Its dimensional phasing follows predictable mathematical patterns. There's structure here, order. Yes, it's dangerous. Yes, it's powerful, but it's not chaos. It's biology we don't understand yet. And understanding is what humanity does best." Torres smiled slightly. "Doctor, perhaps you could prepare a preliminary report for the council. I'm sure they'd be fascinated by your initial findings." "Of course, Ambassador. We've already documented the entity's response to various containment methods. Its reaction to the tachyon field was particularly interesting. And the way its neural patterns shift when it attempts to phase between dimensions suggests a form of conscious control rather than instinct." The aliens stared at her in horror. One of them whispered something that the translator rendered as, "They're taking notes." "We've also begun preliminary discussions about proper care standards," Sarah continued. "Dr. Park from the Ethics Board is already developing enrichment protocols. We want to ensure the entity's psychological well-being during its time in captivity." "Psychological well-being," the alien repeated faintly. "It ate 3 planets." "All the more reason to understand its needs and behaviors," Sarah said. "We'll be publishing our findings, of course. Full transparency. If other species want to develop their own containment and study methods, we're happy to share our data." After the call ended, came to stand beside Sarah. They both looked out at the floating peacefully in its containment field. "Do you think they'll calm down?" asked. Sarah smiled. "Eventually, once they see that we're serious about this. We've contained something they thought was impossible to contain. We're going to study it, learn from it, and add it to humanity's library of knowledge. That's what we do. We see something unknown and terrifying and we ask, but what is it really? And what if more of them come? Then we'll need more containment facilities," Sarah said simply. She pulled up a new document on her tablet and began typing. I should start working on that paper. Initial Observations of Neurology and Dimensional Phasing Mechanisms. That's a good title, don't you think? Laughed, shaking his head. I think you're crazy, but I'm glad you're on our side. Sarah didn't answer. She was already lost in her data, her mind working on the puzzle of the creature they had caught. Somewhere in those readings was the key to understanding something the galaxy had feared for, and Sarah loved a good puzzle. Part 2. 6 months had passed since the Prometheus captured the first. Facility 7 had changed dramatically in that time. What started as a small research station now sprawled across 3 orbital platforms, each one dedicated to studying different types of entities. The galaxy watched in fascination and horror as humanity published paper after paper, each one revealing secrets about creatures that had haunted civilizations for thousands of years. Adjusted his disguise as he walked through the human space station. The holographic emitter made him look human enough to pass casual inspection, though he had to remember to walk on only 2 legs instead of his natural 4. He was a scout for the Empire, one of the oldest and most cautious species in the galaxy. His mission was simple: discover how humanity was doing the impossible. They had lost 2 colony worlds to attacks in the past century. They had tried everything to fight back, to defend themselves, to at least understand what they were facing. Nothing worked. The creatures appeared, destroyed, and vanished. There was no pattern, no warning, no defense. Then humanity caught one, and then another, and another. Superiors needed to know if the humans had discovered some terrible weapon, some forbidden technology that gave them power over the entities. If so, they would need to acquire it, no matter the cost. Every species in the galaxy would want it. He presented his forged credentials at the security checkpoint, holding his breath as the human guard scanned them. The guard barely glanced up, waving him through with a bored expression. Welcome to Facility 7, Doctor. The orientation starts in Conference Room B down the hall, 3rd door on the left. Nodded and followed the directions, trying not to stare at everything around him. The walls were covered with posters showing detailed diagrams of various entities. One poster advertised a seminar on ethical treatment of non-standard life forms. Another announced a bake sale to raise funds for new containment equipment. The conference room held about 20 people, all of them human except for one who looked as confused as felt. A young human woman with bright eyes stood at the front, holding a tablet. Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Jessica Park, head of the Ethics and Welfare Board here at Facility 7. Thank you all for coming to today's orientation. I know you're excited to start working with our residents, but first we need to go over some important protocols. Residents? Translator took a moment to process the word. She was calling them residents. Dr. Park pulled up a holographic image of a creature that makes blood run cold. It was a phase horror, the type that had destroyed one of his moons. The thing was a nightmare of shifting surfaces and too many eyes, existing partially in several dimensions at once. This is Patient 7, or as we call him, Steve. Steve has been with us for 4 months now. When he first arrived, he was highly aggressive and showed signs of severe stress, but we've made excellent progress with him. She tapped her tablet, and the image changed to show the same creature in what looked like a large, complex enclosure. The phase horror moved through a structure of shifting platforms and dimensional puzzles, its many eyes focused on solving some kind of maze. Enrichment activities are crucial, Dr. Park explained. These entities are intelligent. They need mental stimulation. Steve responds really well to puzzle feeders and dimensional mazes. We've found that when his stress levels are low, he's much easier to work with and we get better data from our studies. A hand went up. What if he gets aggressive during an examination? Great question. We never force procedures. If a resident shows distress, we stop and reschedule. Consent is complicated with nonverbal entities, but we look for behavioral indicators of willingness to participate. Steve, for example, has learned that cooperating with health checks means he gets his favorite treats afterward. What kind of treats does a phase horror like? Someone asked. Dr. Park smiled. Compressed exotic matter pellets about fist-sized. We're not entirely sure what nutrients he needs, so Doctor's team is still working on the perfect dietary formula. But Steve definitely has preferences. Couldn't stay quiet any longer. You're treating it like a pet. Dr. Park turned to him and her smile never wavered. We're treating him like a living being in our care. There's a difference. Steve isn't a pet. He's a research subject and we have ethical obligations to him. The fact that he's dangerous doesn't change that. After the orientation, was given a tour of the facility. His guide was a cheerful human named James, who talked constantly as they walked through corridor after corridor. This is Containment Wing A, James explained. We keep the more active residents here. You can see Patient 3 through that observation window. She's a rift crawler, really fascinating biology. We're currently studying how she generates the dimensional rifts she uses to travel. Dr. Martinez thinks it's related to her second nervous system, but that's still being debated. Looked through the window and saw a creature that haunted children's nightmares. It was easily 30 feet long, with too many limbs and a body that seemed to flicker in and out of existence. The rift crawler was moving through an obstacle course, its movements almost playful. Is she dangerous? Asked. Oh, extremely, James said happily. Patient 3 could tear through a starship hull without much effort, but she's been very cooperative. We think she enjoys the obstacle courses. They're similar to the dimensional tunnels she would navigate in the wild. The wild. We think these entities have a natural habitat somewhere in the dimensional layers. Most of them seem to be drawn to our reality by high-energy events. Supernovas, stellar collisions, that sort of thing. We're still working on the exact mechanics. They moved on and saw more horrors from his species' darkest legends. A void tyrant that had once consumed a moon now floated peacefully in a massive containment sphere, covered in sensor arrays. A dimension eater, barely contained by overlapping force fields, was the subject of a doctoral student's thesis. The student sat outside its containment, typing notes and occasionally looking up at the creature with more curiosity than fear. In one lab, watched as two researchers argued passionately about whether their current containment methods provided enough space for a captured entity's psychological health. It's not enough room for something that naturally travels between dimensions, one insisted. But we've added the dimensional extensions, the other countered. It effectively gives the resident access to an area 10 times larger than the physical containment unit. Still not enough. I'm drafting a proposal for expanded facilities. Felt dizzy. These were creatures that had destroyed civilizations. Humanity had turned them into science projects. They were arguing about giving the monsters more room. James led him to an observation deck that looked out over the main research floor. Dozens of humans worked below, moving between containment units, checking sensor readings, making notes. It looked like any other research facility had seen, except that the subjects were nightmares made real. I don't understand, said quietly. How are you not terrified? James looked at him thoughtfully. Oh, we're terrified. Anyone who isn't scared of these things is an idiot, but being scared doesn't mean we stop trying to understand. That's kind of humanity's whole thing. We see something scary and dangerous, and our first instinct is to ask why and how, and what if we could learn from this? But these creatures have killed billions. I know, and by studying them, maybe we can prevent billions more deaths. Knowledge is how we survive, not by hiding, not by running, but by understanding. James gestured to the research floor. Every person down there knows the risks. They chose to be here anyway, because this is important. Spent the rest of the day touring the facility, and everywhere he went, he saw the same pattern. Humans approached these deadly entities with caution, yes, but also with scientific curiosity and a strange kind of care. They measured, they documented, they debated ethical treatment, and they published their findings for anyone to read. That evening, sat in his assigned quarters and composed his report. But he didn't know what to write. He had come looking for a weapon and found something far stranger. Humanity's power over these creatures wasn't based on advanced weapons or forbidden technology. It was something much simpler and somehow more unsettling. They had looked at the galaxy's greatest terrors and decided to study them. As worked on his report, he didn't know that deep in the dimensional layers, in spaces between realities where the entities dwelled, a message was spreading. It passed through the strange consciousness that they and their kin shared, a warning that rippled across dimensions. Avoid the human sectors. The bipedal ones don't fight like prey. They don't run, they capture, they study. They measure and document and ask endless questions. They put you in enclosures. They debate your welfare. They write papers about your biology. For creatures that had existed as apex predators across dimensions, there was something deeply wrong about being treated as a research subject. The word spread, and the entities began to learn what humanity had already discovered. Sometimes the scariest thing in the universe isn't death. Sometimes it's clipboards, consent forms, and peer review. Part 3. 2 years after humanity caught its first, Dr. Sarah stood before the Grand Galactic Assembly. The massive chamber held representatives from 200 species, and every single one of them was watching her. The holographic displays around the room showed graphs, charts, and images from Facility 7's research. Sarah kept her expression neutral and professional, though she wanted to smile. 2 years ago, these same representatives had called humanity reckless, insane, and dangerous. Now they wanted to know how humanity had done what they believed was impossible. In the 24 months since we initiated the Entity Study Program, Sarah began, incursions into human-controlled space have decreased by 97%. More significantly, we've observed a general reduction in entity appearances throughout this entire sector of the galaxy. An alien in the front row raised a tentacle. You claim this is because the creatures fear you. That seems unlikely. These entities have no fear. Sarah nodded to her assistant, and the display changed. It showed a complex network of energy patterns, shifting and pulsing across multiple dimensions. We've discovered that the entities maintain a form of collective awareness. They share information across dimensional boundaries in ways we're still working to understand. But the data is clear. They communicate about threats, about territory, and about us. She pulled up another image, this one showing a timeline of entity appearances. The chart showed a dramatic cluster of events 2 years ago when the Prometheus captured the first. Then the appearances began to drop, slowly at first, then more rapidly. They learned that human space is different, Sarah explained. Other species flee from them or fight them. We do neither. We study them. We contain them. We publish detailed papers on their biology, their behavior, and their capabilities. For apex predators that have never met resistance they couldn't overcome, this represents an entirely new type of threat. You're saying they're scared of being studied. The question came from Ambassador Tors, who was trying not to smile. Not scared, exactly. More like disturbed, uncomfortable. We've intercepted enough of their dimensional communications to understand that human space has gained a reputation. The entities choose to avoid us now, not because they can't defeat us, but because they find our response to them fundamentally unsettling. The assembly chamber erupted in a dozen languages. Sarah waited for the noise to die down, then continued. We currently maintain 17 entities at Facility 7 and its satellite stations. Each one provides valuable data about dimensional physics, exotic biology, and the nature of reality itself. The technological advances we've made by studying these creatures have been remarkable. We're close to achieving stable dimensional travel. Our understanding of exotic matter has increased tenfold, and we've developed new mathematical models that could revolutionize. An alarm cut her off. Sarah's tablet lit up with priority alerts. Around the chamber, other devices began to chime and flash. Tors was on her feet immediately, listening to something through her earpiece. Her face went pale. "We need to evacuate the assembly," Tors said quietly. "Now." Sarah checked her tablet and felt her stomach drop. A dimensional rift was opening, right in this system. Not a small one like the events that produced individual entities. This was a massive tear in reality, the kind that happened maybe once in a century. The readings were off the scale. "All delegates to the emergency transports," Tors ordered. "We have maybe 15 minutes before." "Before what?" someone demanded. "What's coming?" Sarah looked at the readings again, her mind racing through calculations. A void sovereign. The ancient texts describe them. We've never captured one because we've never seen one. They're supposed to be the largest and most powerful of the entities. The chamber descended into chaos. Species that had maintained diplomatic relations for centuries shoved each other toward the exits. The priority was survival now, not protocol. Sarah's comm chimed. She answered it without looking away from her tablet. "Here. The Prometheus is ready to deploy. We're pulling in every research vessel we have. 15 ships total." "That won't be enough," Sarah said. "If the readings are accurate, this thing is 10 times larger than anything we've contained before." "Then I guess we'll have to try harder. Are you coming?" Sarah looked around the evacuating chamber, then at her tablet showing the growing rift. Every instinct told her to run, to get to safety, to let someone else handle this. But that wasn't who humanity was. That wasn't who she was. "On my way, prepare the containment nets, all of them." 3 hours later, Sarah stood on the bridge of the Prometheus, surrounded by holographic displays showing data from 15 research vessels. They had formed a perimeter around the rift, which had grown to nearly 100 miles across. The colony planet behind them was evacuating, but they'd never get everyone out in time. "Contact from the fleet," reported. "They want to know what we're doing." "Tell them we're working," Sarah said absently, her attention on the sensor readings. "And tell them to stay back. This is going to get messy." The entity began to emerge. Sarah had studied the old texts, the fragments of information from civilizations that had encountered void sovereigns and somehow survived to write about them. The texts called them world eaters, reality breakers, the death of stars. Watching one emerge from the rift, Sarah thought the ancient writers had undersold it. The void sovereign was massive beyond comprehension. Its body seemed to fold through multiple dimensions simultaneously, each layer visible and impossible. Dark energy crackled around it like a storm. Where it moved, space itself cracked and bled light. "Deploy nets Alpha through Delta," Sarah ordered, her voice steady despite her pounding heart. "Graviton anchors on my mark. I want overlapping containment fields. If one fails, the others need to hold." The research vessels opened fire, but not with weapons. Nets of exotic matter shot out, each one designed to hold a small moon. They wrapped around the void sovereign, and for a moment, Sarah thought it might actually work. Then the entity roared, and the sound wasn't sound at all. It was reality screaming. 3 of the nets disintegrated instantly. The Prometheus shook like a toy in a storm. "Nets Epsilon through Theta deploy now," Sarah commanded. "All graviton anchors, maximum power. Flood the area with tachyon particles. Make every dimension uncomfortable for this thing." More nets launched. More anchors fired. The research vessels poured everything they had into containing the void sovereign. The entity thrashed and fought, tearing through containment fields that could hold a star. But for every net it destroyed, humanity deployed 2 more. "It's working," said disbelief in his voice. "Sarah, it's actually slowing down." "Prepare the sedative. Triple concentration. Every vessel fires on my mark." "Triple concentration might kill it," someone warned. "Or it might just make it angry enough to kill us," Sarah countered. "But we're committed now. Fire on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark. 15 ships launched clouds of sedative particles, each one carefully calibrated to disrupt neural activity. The clouds enveloped the Void Sovereign, and the entity's thrashing became more violent. It tore free of half the nets, and one of the research vessels had to retreat with damaged systems. Then slowly, the movements began to weaken. The dark energy around the entity flickered. Its dimensional presence became less stable, more focused in a single reality. "It's working," whispered. "Holy hell, we're actually doing this." 6 hours later, the Void Sovereign hung motionless in a containment field that required the combined power output of all 15 research vessels to maintain. It was the most expensive science experiment in human history, and every second it continued cost enough energy to power a small city. Sarah stood in front of the observation window, looking at the massive entity. This close, she could see patterns in its surface, mathematical structures so complex they made her eyes hurt. This thing had existed for eons, probably. It had destroyed worlds, and now it was humanity's research subject. Her comm chimed. It was Tor's. "The Galactic Council wants to speak with you," the ambassador said. "They have questions." "I bet they do," Sarah replied. "Tell them to give me a moment. I need to do something first." Sarah activated the external speakers and began recording a message. She knew the entity couldn't understand human language, but its neural patterns showed it was aware, even in its sedated state. "My name is Dr. Sarah," she said clearly. "You are currently contained by humanity for research purposes. You will not be harmed. We will study you, but we will not torture you. You have rights under the Protection Act of 2287. A legal team is already reviewing your case. You will be provided with appropriate care, and eventually a determination will be made about your future status." Stared at her. "You're reading it its rights." "It's sapient. The neural scans prove that. Sapient beings have rights, even dangerous ones." Sarah sent the recording, then opened the channel to the Galactic Council. Dozens of faces appeared on her screen, all of them showing various stages of shock, awe, and fear. "Doctor," one of them said slowly, "you have captured a Void Sovereign." "We have," Sarah confirmed. "We'll be transporting it to Facility 7 once we've built an expansion large enough to house it safely. Construction estimates put that at about 6 months." "This changes everything," another delegate said. "If you can contain even a Void Sovereign, then these entities are no longer an existential threat to civilization." "They never were," Sarah said quietly. "They were just a problem we didn't understand yet. Now we're learning, and we'll continue to learn." Later, after the calls and the debriefs and the emergency meetings, Sarah found herself back in her quarters on the Prometheus. She pulled up a blank document and began typing her report. "The capture and containment of the Void Sovereign designated Patient 18 represents a significant milestone in biology research. Initial observations suggest a neural complexity far exceeding previous specimens, with quantum structures that may indicate higher-order consciousness. Further study is required to determine the full extent of the entity's cognitive capabilities." Recommendations. Facility 7 requires immediate expansion to accommodate Patient 18. Additionally, we should begin developing more sophisticated enrichment protocols. An entity of this size and complexity will need significant mental stimulation to prevent stress-related complications during long-term captivity. Ethical considerations. The Void Sovereign's apparent sapience raises important questions about consent, autonomy, and eventual release conditions. I recommend a full ethics board review before beginning any invasive study procedures. Sarah paused, reading over what she'd written. Somewhere in the space between dimensions, she knew, entities that had never known fear were learning to feel something new. Not fear of death, but something more subtle and unsettling. They were learning that humanity saw them not as unstoppable threats, but as subjects to be studied, understood, and eventually cataloged. For creatures that had existed as apex predators across realities, being treated as research subjects was profoundly disturbing. Human space had become quiet, protected not by weapons or armies, but by reputation. The entities had begun to avoid humanity, choosing easier prey, less troubling encounters. They still appeared elsewhere in the galaxy, still threatened other species, but they gave human territory a wide berth. Because humanity had discovered the most effective deterrent in the universe, not the threat of violence, but the promise of being poked, prodded, measured, studied, and worst of all, worried about. Ethics boards and animal welfare committees and doctoral dissertations were apparently more terrifying than any weapon. Sarah smiled and kept typing. She had a lot of work to do. Patient 18 wasn't going to study itself, after all. And somewhere in its alien consciousness, there were answers to questions humanity had been asking since they first looked up at the stars. The galaxy's greatest monsters had learned to fear humanity, not because humans were the strongest, or the most violent, or the most advanced, but because when humanity saw something unknown and terrifying, their first response was to ask, "But what is it really?" And then they'd pull out their clipboards and start taking notes. That, it turned out, was the most human thing of all.